You're listening to Latinx Therapy. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional and is not a substitute for psychological diagnoses or treatment. I'm your host, Adriana Alejandre, licensed marriage and family therapist. We are back with another segment, but this is one of our special segments that we haven't done in many, many months. This segment is a Break the Stigma episode. And in these episodes, we talk with amazing professionals, amazing people out in the community globally who are doing things differently, who are doing things to advocate and empower our community with education through the use of their voice and story. So for today, I want to introduce you to our guest. Her name is Rosalia Rivera. She is a consent educator, abuse prevention specialist, sexual literacy advocate, speaker, change agent, and founder of Consent Parenting, which we'll hear all about in a moment. She's the host of About Consent podcast and creator of Consent Wear. Both of those are trademarked, by the way. Rosalia teaches parents, particularly child sexual abuse survivors, how to educate their children on body safety, boundaries, and consent so that they can empower their families to prevent abuse and break intergenerational cycles. Rosalia is on a mission to end child sexual abuse, dismantle shame, and help survivors heal and become thrivers. Rosalia is certified through the Canadian Centre for Child Protection's Commit to Kids program and Darkness to Light Stewards of Child program, as well as the Human Trafficking Prevention Training program called On Watch by Safe House Project. Although Rosalia was born in El Salvador, she grew up in New York, and now she resides in Northern Canada with her parents and 3 young children. Welcome, Rosalia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I've known you now maybe for a couple of years, more so in the digital realm space.
Yes.
Although I was also a guest in your amazing podcast. That was probably maybe like 9 months ago.
I think so, yeah. It was one of my favorite episodes because it was about very much the same, breaking down the taboos, dismantling those taboos that are so hard for people to talk about, but so necessary.
So Rosalia, can you tell us what is consent parenting?
Yeah, so Consent Parenting is my online platform where I teach, as I said, child sexual abuse survivors who are parents, how to empower their families. And I do that through workshops, courses, a membership. And this is really to help them have those conversations that they find maybe they didn't have, that nobody taught them. And of course, because of their own traumatic experiences, they may feel triggered by the content of how to teach this. So I help walk them through that process of educating them so that they can educate their kids and dramatically lower the risk of those children being abused and being able to break those cycles.
And what motivated you to create all your programs?
So when my oldest at the time was 5, so that was about 4 years ago, I realized that I hadn't done enough at that point. They were starting to go into kindergarten, and I had like a panic attack because as a survivor myself, I did not want them to obviously have that experience. I wanted to make sure that they were staying safe and realized that I had waited too long. So I started educating myself about how to teach my children abuse prevention because it was not something that my mom taught me. Unfortunately, she's also a survivor, but it's not that she didn't teach me because she didn't want to, she just didn't know. And I didn't want to be in that same position. So I started educating myself, and I had actually a lot of suppressed memories, which I didn't even know about until I started learning about abuse prevention and these memories started to surface. And I was getting triggered because diving into this kind of education, when it comes to your own kids, you become riddled with anxiety and panic that how are you going to keep them safe? So I would do the training myself. I would try to teach my child. I'd get triggered. I'd stop for a while. And I realized that I really needed to step into my own healing journey if I was going to do this and if I was going to do it right. So I started doing some of that. And as I was learning about the things that I needed to teach, I realized that most programs were teaching you why it was important, and what you needed to teach, but they didn't show you how to teach it. Like, and there was no one that was even speaking to the survivor experience to say, this might be really triggering, and here's how to navigate that so that you keep going, so that you teach this comprehensively. And so that's when I realized, all of the stuff that I was learning and the healing that I was going through and the therapy that I was seeking out had all helped me to learn how to do this really effectively. And I saw the transformation in my children, and I started to realize that it was actually part of my healing, being able to empower my children. And then I realized like nobody was teaching this and nobody was talking about this from the perspective of a survivor to talk to other survivors, because unfortunately, children of survivors are actually 5 times more likely to be abused because their parents shy away from teaching this or altogether don't realize what the other risks are because they don't talk to other survivors about it. So I ended up deciding 2 years ago now to embark on doing this myself. So I got certified and I got all the trainings that I needed to do, and then started actually innovating some of the products that I create myself for those how-to pieces. Like I would always hear, create a safety network. And it's like, okay, how do I do that though? So I started creating that like exact process for parents to make it easier. And my mission has been like, how can we make this as easy as possible for parents to do it? And also to be able to reach the Spanish speaking community. So I started also creating products in Spanish, which are all free. All of the products that I create in Spanish, workshops and things like that are in Spanish will always be free. I want to reach Latin American countries and be able to offer this because it's just not there. And so that has been my why. That's what drives me to this work. And because my mom is a survivor, I'm a survivor, my sister's a survivor, that was part of my mission, was to say, I want to break these cycles. I want to empower others to do the same. And that's why I do this work.
That's amazing. And I'm just curious, this wasn't in the questions that I had sent you, but how did your mom react to your mission? Because I know, again, that this is very taboo and also very triggering in the sense that a lot of survivors get a lot of flashbacks when their children do their own trauma work and begin to talk about these subjects. So, how was it for your mom and for your family?
I think it's been very healing for them. It was initially something that I would discuss with her as I was learning about how to educate my own children. And as I started doing my own therapy, I would talk to her and say, these are some realizations and revelations that I've been having about this. And I realized that you weren't able to get this information and have this access. And as I started talking about the idea of creating this and speaking out and realizing that it was going to help other people, she was really actually starting to get excited and realized, I think, for her that really she shouldn't have had any shame. Growing up, what happened to her happened when she was 14, and she kept that. She didn't disclose to anyone for pretty much her whole life until she was in her 70s when her children found out. And it was really eye-opening because it made me understand so much about why she was so overprotective and why she was so afraid of talking about certain things. And the way that she taught us about protection was very fear-based. And so that has actually helped inform me. So we've had so many conversations about it that have really helped her understand that she wasn't at fault, and this wasn't something that anybody, that certainly we would not blame her for, and she carried so much of that. So it was actually really helpful for her to be able to talk about it with me. And she's very proud of this work now and really champions it because she realizes that it could have changed so much for her and for us. And she's just very happy that I'm able to do it now to help other people. One of the things that I asked her very specifically was, do I have permission to talk about you, not to share her story in detail or anything, but just to share the fact that she is a survivor. I was very surprised because she had no reservations about it. I think she realized how much power this work has and how much healing it can bring her and other people. So she was just thankfully very much behind it.
And so I know that you talk a lot about digital safety, which is what we're going to focus on for this segment. There's absolutely so much. And I think that if people are interested in these broad range of topics, definitely check out Rosalia's podcast because that is where all the knowledge is at. And it's organized into different segments with different guests. So for the episode with me today, we are going to be discussing digital safety. And I'm wondering if your story with motherhood also inspired this, or if there was something in your childhood that also alerted you to really dive into this, to digital safety.
Yeah. So while digital safety is really learning how to navigate rules of the online space that reduce the opportunity for abuse or exploitation to happen, along with media literacy and helping kids navigate that. But when it came to my family, I realized that if there wasn't, it was inevitable for my kids to start using the online space. Our kids more than ever now through this pandemic are on screens all the time. And parents aren't really educated or well versed in how to teach their kids about online safety and digital safety. So it starts offline. A lot of what I talk about, especially with younger kids, has to do with teaching them the basics of body safety, boundaries, and consent when they're really young, because then it will translate to the online space and to the digital world, which they will be navigating throughout their whole life, if we continue on this trajectory of living in a digital world. And so, how it also translates is that a lot of exploitation happens online, but then it also carries back offline, and making that connection of understanding that this is actually one of the ways that human trafficking happens, specifically for child sex trafficking. We need to be able to see what those connections are and how to keep our kids safer, because we end up putting our children at risks when we don't talk about these topics. And that's why I'm always championing to have these conversations, even about things like porn, what it is, what to do when you come in contact with it, knowing that you have a safe space within your family to talk about questions that you may have. All of these pieces are really important to keep our kids safe. And it's alarming to see that there's a lack of education, that parents just think if I just kind of keep an eye on things, that'll be enough.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to give our kids the skills to be able to do it, because eventually they'll go off into the world. And if they don't have these skills, they can very easily get exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember within even my experience with AOL, AIM, right? The instant messenger, how dangerous that was. And there were no filters. And it was also dangerous because in my household, only the children spoke English and my parents were monolingual Spanish speakers. So it's not like they knew even what was being said in these chats. And some of the words I remember, I didn't even know what they were either. And so my parents eventually did speak with me when they realized, like, oh, these are chat rooms and I think that there's danger in them.
Yeah.
Because, of course, they're not stupid either. So I think that that was a very important conversation. And I know my older sister was also involved with that. She helped us all understand what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is like tools. Now more than ever, children are so vulnerable to predators really online because there's so much access. They're all over the place.
And even just to make a distinction for a lot of parents that are not aware of this, that it isn't always just predators that they don't know, like strangers on the internet. It can actually even be peers because of what they have access to and how they're using that. And so it's even more, not to scare people who are listening, but it's a lot more of a deeper web or bigger web danger than they realize if they're not educated. And so it's not about saying don't use the internet or keep your kids offline, because that's unrealistic. It really comes back to education and awareness and prevention.
Yeah, what to do. And like you mentioned, giving the children the safe space, you as the person that they can go to if they have any questions, which they most likely will. And if they're not asking you, they're asking someone else. And maybe that someone else is another child. So we always want to be those people.
Exactly.
And Rosalia, what are some of the myths and their realities about digital safety?
Yeah, there's so many. Well, I think one of the biggest ones, which I kind of mentioned before, is that there is this stranger danger that people, I think, still carry as the idea of how their kids will get into trouble, whether that's offline or online, right? And the truth is that kids are abused 90% of the time by people that they know and trust. And even out of that 90%, 40% are actually family members. So whether that's a parent, a step parent, a relative, It's the likelihood that they are being exploited by a stranger is actually much lower, even on the internet. And unfortunately, what a lot of people don't realize is that online, even if it is a stranger, they're typically introduced to them by someone that they do know. So a friend might have met someone in a chat room, on a gaming app and have been friends with them for a few months. And so now they introduce them to your child as a friend of a friend. So they don't come across as a stranger. And because someone knows them, then, they immediately fall into that trust group, right? So it's
Mhm.
really important for parents really to be aware of the fact that even if you are teaching your own child or you're saying, I know everybody who my child interacts with, they could still be potentially introducing them to someone who's not a good person, or the child themselves could actually be the perpetrator. I've seen that many times with teens and tweens that it's actually their friend who asked them to send them, explicit content and then ended up exploiting them or, extortioning them for blackmailing them for something. So it's a lot of times people think it's just the stranger, and that's a really big myth that a lot of people have to move away from. But then the other thing that's also really important is that parents believe when it comes to human trafficking that it's something that happens overseas or it happens only when your child gets kidnapped, but trafficking can actually happen in your home through the use of the internet because someone can get the child to send them footage that is inappropriate, and then they blackmail the child to continue sending more and more explicit content. And they're using that footage to sell it online. And because of that commercial transaction, it makes it trafficking. And they don't realize that. Or it could be an abuser that's living in the home and is abusing a child, photographing that, filming that, and then again, trading that or selling that footage online, which again makes it trafficking. So that's another misconception that people have is that trafficking can only happen outside and that, if your child is home, they're safe. But we really need to become more educated about what are the signs of abuse, what are the things that we should be paying attention to, learning to listen to your gut and to educate yourself about what grooming is and what those signs are to look for so that your child and yourself, because the parents also get groomed and get tricked or manipulated, that they need to learn those signs so that they don't, their children don't become victims within their own homes, which is a hard pill to swallow because a lot of people don't want to think about the potential of a family member being the abuser, right?
Mhm.
We always want to think of it as someone outside of the home. And then the last one is that this big myth is that people think child sexual abuse is rare or is maybe lower rates now because people are doing more about it. And unfortunately, that's not the truth, especially during this pandemic. Rates have been going up. Reports initially went down because typically people who were like mandating reporters, like teachers and counselors in school, who would have been the ones to make the reports because they saw something suspicious, and those reports went down. But then calls from minors to organizations like RAIN, which is the Rape and Incest National Network, were receiving calls from minors at the highest numbers that they've ever seen. So this is not going away. And that's the reason why we need to be more vocal than ever and more educated than ever so that we can lower those rates and ultimately, prevent it from happening to all families.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned something really important also that there are signs. How can we tell if our child is being abused in the digital space?
So there are some key things to look for in the digital space. So one is if you notice that your child, every time you get near them, they change the screen or they turn the screen away from you, they open up a new window all of a sudden, right? That's a key sign that they're trying to hide something potentially. Another sign is if you see that they're playing new video games that would have needed to be purchased and you didn't purchase them, suddenly they're getting more gifts, that maybe are digital or even physical if they're getting things in the mail that you didn't know where they came from. That's typically grooming behavior. That's somebody who's trying to gain the trust of the child. Other things too are if your child is starting to try to look for privacy when they're using a screen. So if they're trying to use their device at night in their room with the door closed, even though you have an open door room policy, or if it's one of the policies is you have to use it in a common space, but they keep asking to get more privacy. That's typically another sign. And then other signs are just changes in behavior, things that you would normally see in other ways if it was in-person abuse. So changes in appetite or changes in behaviors that they normally would have, being more talkative. If you notice that they're quieter than usual or they're getting upset about things more easily, there's dramatic change in behavior. That's definitely something to be, if you're putting all of those pieces together, that is adding up to the potential that something's going on online and you should be looking into it deeper.
And so, what are some recommendations that you have for us?
Yeah, so lots of recommendations, but
Yes.
obviously the first one is just to start educating yourself about this topic. When we shy away from it because it sounds like a scary thing, we're just giving more power to that abuser that, is out there somewhere, and you're not giving your child the skills that they need, right, to be safer. So obviously starting to educate yourself now, even if your child isn't online yet and you think, oh, they're only 5, they're not really like going on the internet. Now is the time to start learning about it so that you're preparing yourself and seeing what you can start doing now, right? So there might be other things that you can start doing now to teach your child about the concept of tricky people and what that means, and creating safety networks and things like that. So educating yourself. And then when you're talking about abuse prevention in general, it's good to start as early as possible. So start teaching your child as soon as they're verbal about body safety, because those things will ultimately translate to the digital space, and it'll make it a much easier transition to educate them about online safety. You won't be starting from ground zero, and obviously protecting them in those very early years. And then the other thing is to talk to your family about this education process that you're going through. The more vocal we are with those around us, the more that they can also support us in those efforts to keep our kids safe. It's like creating like a firewall against predators, right? We want to create these safe communities within our family, within our greater community. So the more that we can talk about this, and say, hey, I'm starting to learn about abuse prevention. And did you know that the rates were this? And that's why we're going to start teaching our child about XYZ. When we speak up, we're also giving a warning to potential predators who may be within our family, who may be within our community, to say, this family is hands off. They're not going to be an easy target. I'm going to move on to the next. Obviously, we don't want them to abuse any children, but we definitely want to create a safe space around our family. And we do that by being vocal and speaking up to say, and normalizing that conversation, to say, we're teaching abuse prevention. It wasn't something that we were raised with, but I think this is a really great way for our kids to know that they have a voice and how to use it, and that they have rights, and that, they can be safe and all of these things. And we can actually get those family members to maybe start teaching their kids, right? And you see these ripple effects of safety that gets built into family structures that normally would never have had that. So those are the 3 top things that I would say is just start educating yourself, start as early as you can, and get vocal with your community and your family about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we're hearing is communication is key here. We have to communicate with all the adults in the home, set boundaries also with the children and adults. No one is excluded. And I think just from personal experience, realize that these boundaries also shift, and the way that we communicate with our young ones changes as they evolve, like as a Pokemon. That word is in my mind, but it changes as they grow up.
Yeah.
So maybe the language that you used when they were 5, 6 isn't going to work anymore when they're 7, 8, 9, right?
Yeah.
So we have to find community or listen to podcasts or ask somebody like, okay, I'm lost now. I don't know how to word this anymore. Their bodies are changing. I don't know how to talk about it, and be transparent about it, because I think that the more lost we are in parenthood, the more we shy away from communicating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it gets to that dangerous territory where our kids need us more than ever, but now we're not available because we don't feel like we have the tools, or maybe we use the wrong ones. Like maybe we're being more aggressive verbally and we're pushing away our kids. So what I'm trying to say here is reach out for help. If you have any questions, there's many mental health professionals online, consultation services, parent coaches, educators such as Rosalia listening to our podcast, so many things. But with that, Rosalia, what resources can you recommend for us?
So there's actually three that I really love that offer bilingual. So that there is amaze.org, which you can also find many of their videos on YouTube. They're great videos for kids to talk about some of these topics, and they're also available in Spanish, so you can find both. There's also commonsensemedia.org is a fantastic resource, which also provides resources in Spanish. I think their whole website actually is available in Spanish. And that's really great for parents who are really new to the digital space, to, different types of apps or even the media that your children might be consuming, just to say, what is the review on this? What do parents think? And it's a really great resource in general. And they also have many great videos that do those reviews as well. So it's just fantastic resource. So that's one for sure. And then also my safety network course, which is free, and it's also free in Spanish, and it has tons of resources listed in there as well for Spanish speakers. And that teaches you how to create a safe network of adults. So children always feel like they have some lifeline. If they can't come to a parent, they can at least go to another safe adult that's in their safety network. And this free program shows you step by step how to do that in a way that's really effective. So those are three that I would recommend for anyone getting started and like trying to figure out the digital space in particular.
Excellent. Yes, I noted them and they will be in the show notes as well as Rosalia's podcast. Rosalia, was there anything else that needs to be mentioned that I didn't ask?
I just want to mention that I think it's important that we find the courage to have those difficult conversations with the people that we're most afraid to have them with about the boundaries that we're setting for our families. A lot of times, we're afraid of saying to abuelita that we're letting our child decide if they want to give a hug or a kiss. And we think that that conversation is going to be really offensive because, abuelita is going to think we're raising rude kids, right? And on the contrary, if we take the time to explain why we're doing it and help them to see our perspective and even educate them about the topic of child sexual abuse and how prevalent it is in the world. It's not to say that we want to raise rude kids. We're certainly not doing that. And in fact, what we're actually trying to do is raise children that become adults who respect the rights of others and expect their rights to be respected as well. So we're actually teaching about respect. And so just having the courage to have those conversations, thinking very intentionally about how to have them so that we call in our family members to be allies and bring them on board is really important part of this, particularly in the Latinx community. So just want to end it with that because a lot of people are afraid to have these conversations and they just want to educate their kids, but not bring in the whole family. And that's a really important piece.
You're right. You're right. Thank you so much. And where can people find you?
Yeah, so they can go to consentparenting.com where I have all of my free resources there, or you can connect with me on Instagram. It's one of my favorite spaces to hang out. And that's Consent Parenting for my consent content and About Consent podcast for the podcast. But I also do a weekly show on Facebook called Insights Weekly, where I do reviews of books and other resources that parents can use to teach their kids about all of these topics.
What's the Facebook page called?
That one is Consent Parenting as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rosalia, for your time and educating us about this important topic. Please share this episode. Please listen and educate yourself more about this because information changes and there's so much to learn about it. Thank you, Rosalia.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.